The most painful thing my mother ever said to me wasn't that I was a disappointment. It was this: "Please don't embarrass us tonight." She said it so casually that you would have thought she was reminding me to bring a jacket. I was standing in my apartment, holding one earring in my hand and staring at my phone. My mother's name still glowed on the screen. "Just sit at the back table," she had continued. "Don't talk too much. And if anyone asks what you do, just say you're freelancing." Then she hung up before I could answer. If you've ever been treated like the family secret, you'll understand exactly how that silence feels. I looked at my reflection in the mirror for a long moment. 32 years old, owner of a company I'd spent 6 years building from a laptop and a folding table, a company that employed 40 people across 3 states. But to my family, I was still Claire, the strange daughter who worked on her computer and never seemed to have a real job. I should have stayed home that night. Something deep inside me whispered that. But it was my brother Ethan's engagement party, and my parents had spent weeks planning it. Besides, some small and stubborn part of me still wanted what I'd wanted since I was 10 years old. I wanted them to look at me once and see someone worth being proud of. The hotel ballroom was already glowing when I arrived. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and soft jazz floated through the room. My mother spotted me immediately. She walked over, kissed my cheek, then gently took my arm and guided me toward the far corner of the ballroom. "Your seat is back there," she said quietly. I looked toward the table she was pointing at and realized it was the only table in the room where I didn't know a single person. There were 8 seats at the table, and every one of them was occupied by strangers who looked like they belonged in investment magazines. A gray-haired couple discussed luxury real estate in Aspen. A younger man in a tailored suit was talking about opening restaurants in Miami. Nobody recognized me, and honestly, that part felt familiar. I slipped into my chair and folded my hands in my lap. Across the ballroom, I could see my parents laughing at the main table. Ethan was standing beside his fiancée, accepting congratulations like a politician on election night. He looked happy, confident, like the world had always been built with him in mind. I watched my mother glance toward me. For half a second, our eyes met. Then she looked away. It was such a small thing, but somehow it hurt more than being sent to the back of the room. One of the women at my table smiled politely. "So, Claire, what do you do?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, my mother suddenly appeared beside us. She laughed softly and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Oh, she is still figuring things out. Claire has always been a little unconventional." The woman nodded kindly. My mother kept smiling. "She works on little projects online. Nothing too exciting." I felt my cheeks warm, not because I was embarrassed about my life. I loved my work. I loved the company I had built. What hurt was how effortlessly she erased it. She returned to the main table before I could say a word. A few minutes later, Ethan stood to give a toast. He raised his glass and grinned. "I want to thank everyone for supporting me through every chapter of my life." He paused, looking around the room. Then his eyes landed on me. "Well, almost everyone." Several guests chuckled. Then someone near the entrance suddenly stood up and whispered, "I think he just arrived." The music softened almost immediately, the way it does when someone important enters a room. Conversations faded into whispers. Heads turned toward the ballroom doors. Even from the back table, I could feel the shift in the air. My father straightened his jacket. My mother smoothed her hair. Ethan lowered his glass and looked toward the entrance with a smile that seemed almost rehearsed. Then I saw him. Michael Mercer. I recognized him instantly, though I had only met him twice in person. He was taller than I remembered, wearing a dark suit with no tie and carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who never had to announce his importance. My stomach tightened. Nobody at this party knew that my company had been in negotiations with Mercer Capital for nearly 4 months. I had never mentioned it. I had learned years ago that sharing good news with my family often felt like dropping flowers into a river. They simply drifted away unnoticed. My mother hurried toward the entrance. I watched her shake Mr. Mercer's hand, her smile bright and eager. My father joined her a second later. Even from across the room, I could see them speaking animatedly. Ethan fixed his posture and walked over as well. For some reason, the sight made me unexpectedly sad. Not because I wanted to stand with them, but because I realized they looked more excited to meet a stranger than they had ever looked while talking to me. Then, something happened. Mr. Mercer glanced toward the main table, nodded politely, and looked past everyone. His eyes moved slowly across the ballroom. Then they stopped. I had this strange and immediate feeling that he was looking directly at me. I looked behind me to make sure. There was nobody there. And then, to my complete disbelief, he smiled and started walking in my direction. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I was imagining it. People like Michael Mercer did not walk toward women sitting alone at forgotten tables. They certainly did not smile at them. I glanced at the people beside me. They looked just as confused. Mr. Mercer kept coming. Behind him, my mother and father had frozen in place. Ethan took two quick steps as if he intended to intercept him, then stopped. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Mercer reached my table and smiled warmly. "Claire Bennett," he said. Not a question. My name sounded strange coming from him in this room, like someone had opened a window in a house that had been closed for years. I stood slowly. "Hello, Mr. Mercer." A look of relief crossed his face. "Thank goodness. I was beginning to think you had decided not to come." Several people at my table turned to stare at me. I blinked. "I did not realize you were looking for me." He laughed softly. "Looking for you, Claire? I actually came to Chicago hoping I'd get a chance to see you." I heard a glass clink somewhere behind me. My mother's face had gone pale. My father looked completely lost. Ethan's fiancée was staring at him with a puzzled expression. I suddenly remembered the email I'd received that morning. Mr. Mercer's office had asked whether I would be attending a private dinner that evening because there was something important he wanted to discuss in person. I had politely declined, explaining that I had a family event. Apparently, he had not accepted no for an answer. He looked around the ballroom and frowned slightly. "Actually," he said, lowering his voice, "there is a reason I needed to find you tonight." Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope with my name written across the front. For a moment, neither of us moved. I stared at the envelope in my hands. It was cream-colored, thick, and sealed with a small gold sticker. My name was written across the front in dark ink. Around us, conversations had completely stopped. I could feel dozens of eyes on my back. "What is that?" my mother suddenly asked. Her voice sounded thin, almost fragile. Mr. Mercer looked at her politely but did not answer. His attention remained on me. "I wanted to give this to you privately," he said. "But I suppose tonight has other plans." My hands felt strangely cold as I opened the envelope. I recognized the logo embossed in the corner immediately. Mercer Capital. The room seemed smaller somehow. I became aware of every tiny sound. A fork touching a plate. Someone clearing their throat. The distant piano music still drifting from the speakers. My father stepped closer. "Claire?" he said carefully, as though he no longer knew who I was. I broke the seal and pulled out the documents. The first page made my heart skip. I read the opening paragraph twice because I thought I had misunderstood it. Then a third time. "Is something wrong?" Ethan asked. I looked at him, then at Mr. Mercer. He smiled. "Nothing is wrong. Actually, this is probably one of the best nights of your life." My hands were shaking now. 4 months earlier, I had entered negotiations expecting a partnership. I had expected funding, maybe an advisory role. I had never imagined this. I slowly lifted my eyes from the paper. "You are offering to acquire my company?" I asked quietly. My mother stood up slowly. 80 million? She whispered. She looked at me, then at the papers. No, that cannot be right. Her eyes moved back to me. Claire? She said softly. Is this real? Mr. Mercer nodded. Your daughter built something extraordinary. My mother slowly lowered herself into the nearest chair. Then Mr. Mercer smiled at me again. No, Claire, he said gently. I am offering to make you the majority owner of an entirely new company worth nearly $80 million. Nobody said anything. The words seemed to hang above us like something unreal, something that belonged in a movie instead of my brother's engagement party. I looked down at the papers again. My name was there. The valuation was there. The ownership percentages were there. My hands trembled so much that I had to grip the edge of the table. My mother stood up slowly. 80 million? She whispered. She said it carefully, as if speaking too loudly might somehow change the number. Mr. Mercer nodded. Your daughter built something extraordinary. Daughter. It was such a simple word, but hearing it spoken with pride made my chest tighten unexpectedly. My father looked at me as though he had never seen me before. I remembered all the nights I had spent at his kitchen table years earlier, trying to explain what my company did. Machine learning, predictive analytics, data modeling. He had smiled politely and changed the subject to Ethan's sales numbers. Suddenly, every one of those moments came rushing back. Ethan laughed. It was short and uncomfortable. Okay, hold on. There has to be some misunderstanding. Nobody looked at him. He cleared his throat. Claire works from home. She wears sweatpants to meetings. A few people near the main table shifted awkwardly. Mr. Mercer frowned slightly. I have attended meetings with Fortune 500 executives wearing jeans. Genius does not come with a dress code. Ethan's face reddened. For the first time that night, I saw something unfamiliar in his expression. Fear. My mother walked toward me slowly. Claire, she said softly, why did you never tell us? I looked up at her. There were so many answers to that question. Because nobody listened. Because nobody asked. Because every accomplishment I ever mentioned somehow became smaller in your hands. Before I could speak, Mr. Mercer looked at his watch. Then he smiled at me again. Actually, there is one more thing they probably do not know. Mr. Mercer looked around the ballroom for a moment, almost as if he wanted everyone to hear what he was about to say. Then he turned back to me. Claire, I was hoping to announce this privately after you sign the documents next week. My stomach tightened. Announce what? He smiled. The new company will not be headquartered in New York or San Francisco. The room remained silent. It will be headquartered right here in Chicago. I blinked. I had never asked for that. In every discussion, I had assumed I would eventually relocate. Mr. Mercer continued. I remember what you told me during our second meeting. You said you stayed in Chicago because your family is here. My mother put a hand over her mouth. I had forgotten I even said that. I remembered the conversation now. We had been discussing expansion plans, and he had casually asked whether I would move. I had laughed and said that I probably never would because my parents were getting older and my brother had his own life. Someone should stay close. The entire room was staring at me now. Ethan looked confused. My father looked devastated. Mr. Mercer spoke again. I have met hundreds of founders. Very few people build something extraordinary and still organize their entire future around taking care of their family. Nobody said anything. I could hear the air conditioner humming overhead. Then my mother whispered almost to herself, "You stayed for us?" I looked at her. Suddenly I was 10 years old again, carrying groceries into the house. 17. Driving my father to his doctor's appointments. 26. Declining a job in Seattle because it would take me too far away. A lifetime of small decisions returned all at once. I swallowed hard. Before I could answer, my father sat down heavily in his chair and covered his face with both hands. My father did not move for several seconds. His shoulders seemed smaller somehow, as though an invisible weight had suddenly settled on them. I had never seen him sit like that. Not when he lost his job 20 years earlier. Not when his father died. My mother slowly lowered herself into the chair beside him. Her eyes never left me. "You stayed because of us," she said again. But this time it sounded less like a question and more like grief. I did not answer immediately. I looked around the ballroom instead. The crystal chandeliers still glowed. The flowers still sat in their vases. The pianist was quietly playing again, almost cautiously, as though afraid of disturbing something fragile. It struck me how strange life could be. 1 hour earlier, I had been hidden at the back of the room like an afterthought. Now, 30 people were looking at me as though they had never truly seen me before. "I did stay," I finally said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. My mother blinked rapidly. Ethan looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. It was not anger anymore, it was something sadder. Confusion, maybe. "But why?" he asked quietly. "After everything?" I thought about that. I thought about Sunday dinners, birthday cards, my father's old coffee mug sitting in the kitchen. The ordinary little things that somehow become part of you. "Because I kept hoping we'd eventually find our way back to each other," I said. The words hung there. My mother suddenly covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes filled with tears. My father finally looked up. He looked directly at me, and for the first time in years, there was no disappointment, no distraction, no polite smile. There was only regret. Then he stood up slowly and began walking toward me. My father stopped a few feet in front of me. The entire ballroom seemed to disappear. It was just him and me standing there, with 30 silent witnesses around us. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. He opened his mouth once, then closed it again. Finally he said, "I do not know when I stopped seeing you." He swallowed hard and looked down for a second. Somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention. The words landed softly, but they hit me harder than I expected. I had spent years wanting my parents to notice me, and now, standing in the middle of my brother's engagement party, my father was admitting that he had not. My mother had quietly walked over by then. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears slipped down her face, and for once she had nothing to say. Ethan was standing a few feet behind them. He stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. "I guess I never really knew you either," he said quietly. Nobody moved. The room was so silent that I could hear the soft clink of glasses being collected somewhere near the bar. I looked at the three of them. Part of me was still hurt. Part of me was relieved. And another part of me simply felt tired. The strange thing about pain is that it can become so familiar that you stop noticing how heavy it is. Then one day, someone finally tells the truth, and you realize you have been carrying it for years. I smiled anyway. Not because everything had suddenly been fixed. It had not. There were still years of missed conversations and misunderstandings between us. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. "Mr." Mercer gently cleared his throat and lifted the documents in his hand again. A few people laughed softly, and the tension finally broke. Years from now, I do not think I will remember the $80 million first. I think I will remember my father looking at me as though he had just met me. And sometimes I still wonder how many people spend years feeling invisible inside their own families, and what might happen if they were finally seen.